For anyone who's looking to move overseas to work or live, let this video be your sign to do it. Hi everyone, my name's Ernestine Siu, and you guys probably don't know me because this is my first ever YouTube video. But for context, I was born and raised in the Bay Area, but currently I'm living in Singapore. I feel like I finally have a lay of the land, so I figured this would be the best time for me to sit down and answer some questions that I had before I moved here. Let's start with some pros and cons. So the first pro is that I think a lot of people know this, but English is Singapore's primary language. As long as you speak English, it's gonna be really easy for you to get around. Even the older people, we call them uncles and aunties here, even the uncles and aunties at the hawker stalls, they all are probably gonna know how to speak English. The second pro that I was really not used to, but I really love about Singapore is the safety. Having lived in places like San Francisco and New York City, I feel like I've just always had this anxiety when it came to my safety walking around outside, especially after 2020, like all those hate crimes that were happening. And these 4 months I've been in Singapore, I've never felt the need to be hyper vigilant, which is something that I've been taught ever since I was really little. Of course, it's not something you should take for granted ever, but I just feel like I don't have that constant lingering anxiety that something might happen to me on the public transportation. So yeah, that's something that I really appreciate about this country. The third pro is that the locals are really welcoming and friendly. And the last 4 months that I've been here, most of the friends I've made have actually been locals, and they're all just very open and they'll show you around. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry too much if you're moving here about making friends because everyone's quite friendly. The fourth pro is that everything is very efficient. Like when you think of something working in an ideal manner, that's how things work in Singapore. I think everyone raves about the transportation system here. It really is so easy, and the entire island is really well connected. Like you can get from one side of the island to another side within an hour. Like when it says it's gonna get here at a certain time, it's gonna get there on the dot. And you just never really have to worry about being late to things as long as you're able to plan when you arrive at the train station. The fifth pro is obviously the food. It really is just unbeatable in Singapore because you have every single cuisine you can imagine. And also like you can get the best high-end food with like from world-class restaurateurs, but then you can also get $5, $4, $3 meals at your local hawker center, and it's honestly just as good. Another pro is that it's really easy and it's really affordable to travel living in Singapore because the airport, Changi Airport, first of all, it's beautiful. Second of all, it's very well connected to a lot of neighboring countries and just honestly around the world. It's an airport that a lot of countries have direct flights to. So I know a lot of locals and expats who live here, and literally every other weekend there's somewhere new. Like I'm calling up my friend and she's like, oh, I'm in Vietnam. Okay, I'm in Bali. I'm staying in Bali for 10 days to go surfing. And it's really a nice lifestyle, honestly. Okay, the next pro is something that I never anticipated, but it's actually one of my favorite things that I've learned being here, and that is that the country is very global. Like it's such a hub, it's such a destination city, destination country. There are a lot of friends that I've met who are expats, but they're from Australia or they're from London. And usually, I mean, being in the US, it might be hard for me to be in a situation where there's such a big concentration of just people from all around the world, but that's something that you definitely will get here in Singapore. And I just feel like my worldview has expanded. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the cons. So the first con is the weather. Depending what kind of person you are, most people will probably think the weather is a bit of a con here. I do love sunny weather, and it's almost always sunny here. It's almost always warm. No, sorry, it's always warm. It's always warm here. Like it's always really hot, actually, not just warm. It's really hot and really sticky. So if you're not a warm weather type of person, don't live here unless you want to suffer, okay? Because the weather here stays consistently between 80 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, essentially. I feel like as an American, when I first got here, I was trying to get as tan as possible. But after being here for a while, you realize that like the sun is really strong. So now I carry around an auntie umbrella, which is basically an umbrella to cover me from the sun while it's sunny outside. But yeah. The second con is that it's very strict here. Some locals have this joke that Singapore is like Disneyland with a death penalty, which is kind of true. There are a lot of rules, but those rules are also what honestly keeps people so safe. So I don't really think it's a con, but for example, things like drinking or eating in the train, even if you're drinking water, like they will fine you for stuff like that. It's never happened to me, but I heard it happens. In addition, things like literally chewing gum is contraband here. So don't bring gum into Singapore. And like jaywalking is also not allowed, although I jaywalk. Okay, if you're a Singapore government, close your ears. I jaywalk all the time here, I will say, but yeah, people are just more careful about it. It's not as acceptable as it is in places like New York, especially, or like California. Okay, the third con, which is, I feel like is the biggest con of living in Singapore, is that it's really expensive. You know how Singapore always ranks as like the most expensive country in the world, most expensive city in the world? It's true, it is very, very expensive. Yeah, I mean, day-to-day living, I wouldn't expect to save too much. Obviously, it depends on your lifestyle, but for example, the place I live in right now, the rent literally costs more than what I was paying when I was living in New York City. So I would just keep that in mind. A lot of things might be cheaper, like the food, but for the most part, I would say that the prices are quite similar to the US. Another thing I would keep in mind moving here is that Singapore is really, really, really small. I looked it up and Singapore is smaller than the Bay Area. It's smaller than New York City, like the city itself, and it's literally half the size of Oahu, the island. And it's also very densely populated. So there are a lot of people. The malls especially get really, really packed. I always tell friends who are visiting, you really only need 3 days to be able to explore everything that you'd want to see here as a tourist and all like the big name food attractions. So obviously living here, it's really easy to run out of things to do. Another thing I didn't know until I moved here to Singapore is that the culture is quite conservative compared to where I'm from. People tend to follow basically the same life path. Go to a good school, like while you're in school, you're finding your spouse, and then you basically get engaged, you buy a house. It's very traditional. At least as someone who's still kind of an outsider looking in, it can like be a little bit boring, honestly. And a lot of people are afraid to kind of voice their opinions. Like the culture here, people don't really express that outwardly as much. So yeah, that's something I noticed. And it also translates to honestly the work culture here. And the Singapore government actually doesn't allow for protests unless, I think you're allowed to protest, but you have to ask for permission to protest or something. Don't quote me, but it's like the Asian culture combined with like these government laws. I think it just creates this culture of people being very hush-hush. So I'll keep that in mind if you're coming from a place where like it's very common to like speak up about things. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, my name is Ernestine, and if you guys want to learn more about Singapore, about expat life, about career or journalism, then feel free to subscribe. I'm very new to the YouTube game, so I'd really appreciate any love possible. See you next time.